Hello everyone, Archana is here. Welcome to the fourth session of presentation ICSE Class 10 Paper 2 Literature in English. In today's session, let us deal with the prose The Little Match Girl, the story which is written by the author Hans Christian Andersen. He was a Danish writer popular for his influential stories about children. However, his stories are not restricted to children alone and have themes of universal appeal that transcend age and culture. The story is set against the backdrop of a New Year's Eve. The story is said to have taken place in a town around the early 20th century. It is all about the poverty, hunger, and helplessness of a little girl who is sent to sell matches when she's supposed to stay at home or at school. When all the world seems to be celebrating the New Year's Eve, the girl is deprived of the joy. But the readers are caught in the riddle whether it is sheer poverty of the family or the cruelty of a father to his daughter, maybe both. In its plot and setting, the story has a simple approach. The author narrates the story in third person narrative where dialogues are rather scanty. This has been one way narration with no flashbacks and no twists, but the story is rich in its use of irony, imagery, and symbols, emphasizing the need for compassion for those who are less privileged than us. The story begins in this way. It was bitterly cold, snow was falling, and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked, bareheaded and barefoot, through the streets. She had been wearing slippers, it is true, when she left home, but what good were they? They had been her mother's, so you can imagine how big they were. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. One slipper could not be found, and a boy had run off with the other, saying that it would come in very handy as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. So, what happened here? The story opens with the author describing the weather conditions. It is an extremely cold winter on the last evening of the year. There is a little girl who is on the streets trying to sell her matchsticks. Despite the cold weather, the girl has no warm clothes on her or even slippers to wear. She left her home wearing her mother's footwear. But since they were oversized, she lost them as she was crossing the street. So now she walked bare feet in the brutal cold. The little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet, which were red and blue with the cold. In her old apron, she carried a great many matches, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well. Nobody had bought any from her, and no one had given her a single penny all day. She crept along, shivering and hungry, the picture of misery. Poor little thing. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair, which curled so prettily about her neck. But she did not think of her appearance now. Lights were shining in every window, and there was a glorious smell of her roast goose in the street. For this was New Year's Eve, and she could not think of anything else. She huddled down in a heap in a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected further out into the street than the other. But though she tucked her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. She did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny. Father would be sure to beat her, and besides, it was so cold at home, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straw and rags. Her thin hands were almost numb with cold. If only she dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it on the wall, and warm her fingers. So, now what happened? Apart from the bleak cold, she was also very hungry. It was the holiday season, and a festive feeling was all around when this poor little girl was wandering so that she could sell some matchsticks. Cold, hunger, and grief made her look like a figure of sorrow herself. As she moved from street to street, she saw the lights of a festivities around. The candles and the aroma of delicious food was sensed by her. She did not wish to go home because her house did not have much covering but a roof. It could not protect them from the severe cold. She pulled one out scratch. How it spluttered and burned. It had a warm, bright flame like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. But what a strange light! It seemed to the little girl as if she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. The fire, how wonderful that was! The child had already stretched her feet to warm them. When out went the flame, the stove vanished, and there she sat with the burnt match in her hand. So, what happened here? After some time, she huddled herself against a wall and sat down. Her hands had become numb. To relieve herself from the terrible cold, she hesitantly burned one matchstick from the bundle she had. She held her hand over the bright light. She felt the warm, bright flame as if she was sitting beside a large iron stove. She tried to warm her feet, but the flame went out. So here we will stop the session 4, the little match girl, part 1. Let us see what will happen to the little girl in the next session, that is part 2. Whether she will be able to warm herself with the matchsticks or sell the matchsticks and get back home with some money she earned. Now let us conclude whatever we have dealt in today's session. The story The Little Match Girl was written by Hans Christian Andersen in 1845 during the Victorian era. Begging was illegal and child abuse was common during that time. Therefore, the class difference is clearly highlighted in the story. This little girl is the only major character in the story. She is forced and threatened to sell matchsticks by her father. She was scared because she was not able to sell any matchsticks that night. If she went home without any money, she would be beaten by her father. The story is set against the backdrop of a New Year's Eve. It was a very cold, extreme cold winter evening with snow and frost. Even everyone was busy in celebrating the festive day with candles, Christmas trees, and delicious dishes, a poor little girl was wandering on the streets trying to sell her matches. She was barefoot and bareheaded. Though she had the shoes of her mother, she lost them on the way. Her scanty clothes were not enough to make her warm. The girl was sure to be beaten by her father as she could not earn a single penny the whole day. So she decided not to go home and sat down on the ground on a corner created by two houses. While sitting there, she lit a match to warm herself. To her surprise, she saw a great iron stove with bright brass knob in the bright flame of the match. The stove vanished when the flame went out. So children, here I have enclosed home assignment. It's a simple question. You have 5 questions. First question, when does the story take place? Second, why were her slippers so large? Third, why didn't she want to go home? Fourth question, why did she light the first match? Fifth question, how does Hans Christian Andersen describe the coldness the little girl is feeling? Please answer to these questions and submit in the Google Classroom. Thank you.